I answered a phone in an abandoned station. The caller was 16 years in the past the first time the dead payphone rang. It was 11:17 at night. I was alone inside Bellwether Station, surrounded by covered benches, broken clocks, and cardboard boxes filled with the forgotten belongings of people I would never meet. Rain struck the windows so hard that I almost convinced myself I had imagined the sound. Then the phone rang again. The line had been disconnected for 12 years. I lifted the receiver, expecting silence. A man said, "Why is there a woman inside a station that hasn't opened yet?" I looked across the dark waiting room. "The station closed 12 years ago," I answered. The man laughed nervously. "That's impossible," he said. "It's October 14th, 2010. Welcome to Hidden Chapters Tales, where every ordinary life hides a story no one was meant to hear. My name is Sophie Bennett." In October of 2026, I was 31 years old and employed by the Bellwether Historical Trust to document everything inside the town's abandoned railway station before the building was demolished. It was not the kind of work I had imagined doing with my life. At 22, I wanted to travel through Europe restoring paintings in old churches. At 26, I planned to open a small gallery with the man I thought I would marry. By 31, the engagement was over. The gallery existed only in a folder on my laptop, and I made a living placing numbered stickers on objects no one had touched in decades. I told myself I liked forgotten places because they were honest. An abandoned building never promised it would stay. Bellwether Station had opened in 1891. Its red brick walls, arched windows, and copper roof had once welcomed thousands of passengers every week. By the time I arrived, weeds had pushed through the platforms and pigeons lived above the ticket hall. The last passenger train had departed in 2014. The city planned to replace the building with apartments and a parking garage. I had 6 weeks to catalog its remaining records, signs, furniture, and architectural details. The only other person who regularly entered the building was Walter Avery, the 67-year-old caretaker. Mr. Avery had worked at the station since he was 17, first carrying luggage, then selling tickets, and finally maintaining a building the railway company no longer wanted. On my first day, he handed me a heavy ring of keys and pointed toward the old payphone beside the ticket windows. "Don't bother trying that," he said. "Line S been dead since the station closed. I have a cell phone." Good. That one only ever brought trouble. I assumed he meant expensive long-distance calls or teenagers reporting false emergencies. Mr. Avery did not explain, and I did not ask. 3 weeks later, during the storm, the phone rang. I pressed the receiver against my ear and listened to the stranger breathe. "Who is this?" I asked. Julian Mercer. "And you think it's 2010? "I don't think it, I know it." "Where are you?" "Bellwether Station." "Main waiting room beside the west ticket window." I turned slowly. The waiting room was empty. "I'm standing beside the west ticket window," I said. There was a pause. "No, you're not." "I promise you I am." "Then what am I wearing?" "I can't see you." "Exactly." His voice carried the confident irritation of someone trying not to sound frightened. I asked him to describe the room. "There are 6 rows of wooden benches," he said, "a green clock over the ticket windows, a soda machine near the north entrance that steals dollar bills. And there's an ugly mural of 2 trains crossing a bridge." I looked around. 4 rows of benches remained. The green clock had been replaced by a black one. There was no soda machine. The wall behind the timetable was painted beige. "What color are the ticket windows?" I asked. "Dark red." "Why?" "In my time, they were gray." "Stay on the line," I said. I carried the receiver as far as its metal cord allowed and opened a box of archival photographs. My hands shook as I searched through images taken during the station's final renovation. One photograph showed the waiting room in 2010. 6 rows of benches, green clock, red ticket windows, soda machine, and behind them a mural of 2 trains crossing a bridge. "How are you doing this?" I whispered. "Doing what?" I looked at the date printed on the photograph. October 2010. "What day did you say it was?" "October 14th. "What time?" 11:23. The black clock above me also showed 11:23. A pulse of static passed through the receiver. "Sophie," Julian said. I had not told him my name. "How do you know who I am?" "You told me." "No, I didn't. You said, 'My name is Sophie and this station closed 12 years ago.'" I remembered saying the second part, but not the first. The static grew louder. "Listen," Julian said. "If this is some kind of prank, it's elaborate. But if it is," the line went silent. The clock read 11:33. I stood with the receiver against my ear until the recorded operator's message finally began. The number you have reached is no longer in service. The next morning, I told myself exhaustion had caused the entire conversation. I had been working 12-hour days. The storm had damaged electrical lines. Perhaps someone had restored the payphone number as a joke and used information from the internet to frighten me. Then I searched for Julian Mercer. There were dozens of people with that name, but none connected to Bellwether. I found a wedding photographer in Ohio, a professor in Vermont, and a dentist in Arizona. No 30-year-old photographer working at a railway station in 2010. When Mr. Avery arrived, I asked whether the payphone could still receive calls. His keys stopped moving in his hand. Did it ring? The question was too immediate. You said the line was dead. It is. That's not what I asked. Mr. Avery walked toward the phone but did not touch it. What time? 11:17. He closed his eyes. Who was on the other end? A man named Julian. Mr. Avery shook his head and turned away. I followed him into the old station master's office. You know something? I know stories. What stories? He sat behind the desk and looked through the dusty window at the payphone. In 1963, a ticket clerk claimed she received a call from her husband while he was serving overseas. He told her he would return the following Tuesday. The problem was that he had died 3 days earlier. In 1987, a boy answered the phone and heard his own voice warning him not to board the midnight train. That train later derailed outside town. And you believe those stories? I asked. I believe people hear what they need to hear. Julian wasn't dead. He said he was in 2010. Maybe time and death aren't as different as we think. I wanted a technical explanation, not a legend, but Mr. Avery refused to discuss it further. For 4 nights, the phone remained silent. On the 5th night, rain returned. At exactly 11:17, the payphone rang. I answered before the second ring. Sophie? The relief in Julian's voice surprised me. I'm here. You disappeared. The line disconnected at 11:33. Same here. We compared dates. For both of us, 5 days had passed. Time moved normally on either side of the call, separated by exactly 16 years. Julian said he had returned every night, but the phone only rang during rain. He was documenting the station for a regional architecture magazine. He had permission to work after hours and often used the empty building as a darkroom for his photographs. I need proof, I said. The photographs weren't enough. Proof you aren't someone standing outside with a history book. He thought for a moment. There's a cracked blue tile beneath the phone. I looked down. The floor had been covered with brown vinyl in 2012. Maybe in your time. I'm going to lift it. I heard metal scraping stone. I have a brass transit token in my pocket, he continued. I'll place it beneath the tile. Wait, why? What if changing the past changes something else? It's a coin, Sophie, not an assassination. The static shifted. Then he said, done. Nothing happened. Still there? He asked. Yes. Then look. I found a utility knife and cut through the vinyl around the base of the phone. Beneath it were the old blue tiles. One had a crack shaped like a lightning bolt. My fingers barely fit beneath its edge. I pulled until the tile lifted with a brittle snap. In the dust below was a brass transit token. It was green with age. One side showed a small locomotive, the other was engraved with the initials JM. I sat on the floor. I found it. Julian stopped breathing for a second. What does it look like? Older than both of us. So you believe me? I turned the token between my fingers. I believe something impossible is happening. That's a start. We used the remaining minutes to establish rules. The phone rang only when it rained in both years. The connection opened at 11:17 and ended at 11:33. Neither of us could initiate the call. Moving an object in 2010 made it appear aged in 2026 only after Julian released it and described exactly where he placed it. Before the line disconnected, he asked me one final question. What happens to Bellwether Station? I looked at the demolition notices stacked on my table. Nothing good, I said. During the next week, rain fell almost every night. Our first conversations were experiments. Julian hid a matchbook behind a radiator. I found it faded and brittle. I wrote a note on the station wall in pencil. He could not see it because my changes did not travel backward. The connection allowed the past to alter my present, but my present could reach him only through my voice. Soon, we ran out of safe experiments. Then we began talking. Julian told me he had grown up moving from city to city because his mother managed hotels. Train stations were the only places that felt familiar, so he began photographing them. He loved the moment before departure, when every person in a waiting room still contained several possible futures. I told him about the gallery I had planned to open. I did not tell him how humiliating it had felt when my former fiancé, Andrew, said he wanted a more practical life and opened a design studio with someone else 6 months later. Julian seemed to hear what I left unsaid. You stopped painting because he left? I stopped because I needed income. Those aren't the same answer. You ask too many questions. I only get 16 minutes. Every call ended too quickly. I began arriving at the station early. I organized the day's work near the payphone and checked the weather forecast for both 2026 and historical records from 2010. On dry nights, I felt foolishly disappointed. On rainy nights, my entire day narrowed toward 11:17. Julian started leaving letters behind the blue tile. He could not send them immediately because paper placed in the wall appeared in my time yellowed and fragile, but the words remained. His first letter contained only one sentence. You sound different when you are smiling. I read it 3 times before realizing I was smiling again. I answered through the phone because nothing I wrote could travel backward. That was a terrible use of time travel, I told him. I disagree. You could have sent stock prices. Would you have trusted me if I did? Probably not. Then I chose correctly. One night he left a pressed yellow flower inside an envelope. By the time I found it, the petals had faded nearly white. It died, he said when I described it. It lasted 16 years. That isn't the same as living. No, I said, but it isn't nothing. The conversations became less about the phone and more about us. We described our apartments, childhood fears, favorite songs, and the lives we had expected to have by 30. Julian had never married. He had ended a long relationship the previous spring because his girlfriend wanted him to stop traveling and take photographs for advertising agencies. Maybe she was being reasonable, he said. Reasonable isn't always right. That sounds like experience. It is. He told me I hid behind jokes whenever a conversation approached something painful. I told him he romanticized uncertainty because commitment frightened him. Neither of us hung up. One Saturday, Julian found an old radio in the station office. He tuned it to a late-night jazz program. Can you hear it? He asked. Through the receiver came a distant piano melody wrapped in static. I searched the song on my phone until I found the same recording. For 16 minutes, the music played in both ears. Sit on the third bench, Julian said. Why? Just do it. I sat in the middle of the third row. In 2026, the bench was scratched and one armrest was missing. In his time, it was polished oak. I'm sitting on the other end, he said. I placed my hand on the empty space beside me. This is ridiculous. Completely. We aren't even in the same room. Technically, we are. I closed my eyes. Rain moved across the roof. The music played through my phone and his radio almost synchronized. For a moment, I felt warmth beside my hand. I opened my eyes. In the dark reflection of the ticket window, a man was sitting next to me. He was only a shadow, long coat, camera strap across one shoulder, head turned in my direction. I spun around. The bench was empty. Sophie? Julian asked. What happened? Nothing. I stared at the reflection, but the figure had disappeared. You're using the voice you use when something definitely happened. I thought I saw you. He became quiet. What did I look like? Like someone who needs a better coat. He laughed and the fear passed. That night after the call ended, I remained on the bench until the music stopped. I knew what was happening between us. I also knew how impossible it was. Julian existed 16 years behind me. Even if he lived an ordinary life, he would be 46 in my time. He might be married, he might have children, he might have forgotten the strange woman on the telephone, or he might not have lived at all. The next morning, I searched the station archives more carefully. I found Julian in a box of unprocessed photographs donated by a local newspaper. His name appeared on the back of an image showing firefighters outside Bellwether Station. The date was October 31st, 2010. The article attached to the photograph carried the headline, 3 Dead in BELLWATHER Station Fire. The fire began shortly after 11 at night in an electrical room beneath the east platform. 2 employees escaped. 8-year-old Lily Moore became trapped in the baggage corridor. A photographer named Julian Mercer entered the building after hearing her cries. Neither of them came out. I read the paragraph until the words stopped looking real. The fire was 12 days away in Julian's time. That night, the phone rang. I let it ring 4 times before answering. I thought you weren't coming, Julian said. I was working. You sound strange. I'm tired. Sophie? What? What did you find? I gripped the article in my hand. Why do you assume I found something? Because you only lie when you're trying to protect someone. You don't know me well enough to say that. Maybe not in years. The sentence hurt more than it should have. I told him there was a maintenance problem at the station and asked whether he planned to work there on Halloween. Probably. The magazine deadline is November 2nd. Don't. Why? Because I'm asking you? That isn't an answer. Take the night off. Go anywhere else. He waited. Does something happen here? The clock showed 11:31. Sophie, tell me. I could not. The line disconnected with his question unfinished. For the next 2 days, no rain fell. I was relieved at first. Silence gave me time to think. Then the silence became unbearable. I carried the newspaper article everywhere. I read the official fire report, witness statements, and building inspection records. The cause was listed as an electrical short in a basement distribution panel. Flames traveled through an old ventilation shaft and reached the baggage corridor before the alarm activated. Lily Moore had been waiting for her father, a railway engineer whose train was delayed. A station employee told her to remain in the baggage office. When smoke filled the waiting room, everyone assumed the child had already left. Julian heard her banging on a locked door. He went back inside. The eastern ceiling collapsed 6 minutes later. I tried to find an alternative route on the station plans. The public floor plan showed only one entrance to the baggage corridor, directly beneath the area that collapsed. Mr. Avery found me asleep over the blueprints on Thursday morning. You look worse than the building, he said. I showed him the article and asked if he remembered the fire. His face tightened. Everyone in Bellwether remembers. Was there another way into the baggage corridor? Not officially. What does that mean? He studied me for a long time, then unlocked a metal cabinet in the station master's office. From the back, he removed a rolled sheet of paper tied with string. It was an engineering plan dated 1942. During the war, the station had been designated as an emergency transport point. A narrow service tunnel connected the baggage corridor to a maintenance room beside Platform 4. The entrance was sealed during renovations in 1978, but the tunnel itself remained. Why isn't this in the city archive? I asked. Railway didn't want inspectors asking questions about unsupported tunnels. Could someone have used it in 2010 if they knew where to find the door? Did you? Mr. Avery nodded. Why didn't you tell the firefighters? His eyes filled with something deeper than grief. I did. By the time they understood what I was saying, the roof was already down. I photographed every part of the plan. The tunnel entrance in the baggage corridor was hidden behind a shelving unit. The platform entrance was covered by a sheet metal panel secured with 4 bolts. A ring of emergency keys had once hung inside the station master's office. Where were the keys during the fire? Mr. Avery looked toward the floor. In my coat pocket. He had gone outside to help evacuate passengers. When Julian asked how to reach Lily, no one could open the corridor from the safe side. You couldn't have known, I said. Neither could he. That evening, clouds gathered over Bellwether. I reached the station before the rain began. At 11:17, the phone rang. Julian did not greet me. Tell me what happens on Halloween. I closed my eyes. There's a fire. How bad? 3 people die. Am I one of them? There was no gentle way to answer. Yes. The line became so quiet, I could hear the rain in his ear. How? He asked. I told him everything. The electrical room, the failed alarm, the child behind the baggage door, and the ceiling collapse. He did not speak for almost a minute. If I don't go to the station, do I live? I think so. And the girl? Julian, does Lily live if I stay away? The article says you were the only person who heard her. He exhaled slowly. Then staying away isn't a solution. You cannot walk into a fire because an old newspaper says you did, and I cannot let an 8-year-old die because I received advance notice. We can warn the station, call the fire department, report the electrical panel. I'll do all of that. Then you don't need to be there. What if they ignore me? I knew they might. A photographer claiming a mysterious voice from 2026 had predicted a fire would not be treated as a reliable source. There's another route, I said. A service tunnel. I described the 1942 plan. Julian wrote down every turn and measurement. I told him where Mr. Avery kept the emergency keys and which section of the eastern ceiling would collapse. You've been working on this, he said. Of course I have. Even while you were pretending nothing was wrong. Especially then. The clock showed 11:29. If I survive, he said, will you find me? Yes, you don't know what kind of person I'll become. I'll find you anyway. I'll be 46. I understand arithmetic. He laughed softly, but his voice broke. What if I forget you? Then I'll remind you. And if everything changes, what if you never take this job or never answer the phone? I had been avoiding that possibility. Changing the fire could change the station, the archives, and every decision that placed me inside the waiting room at 11:17. "Leave something for me," I said. "Where?" "Behind the blue tile, a letter with my full name and the date we first spoke. Sophie Bennett, October 14th, 2026. "Exactly. And where should I meet you?" I looked at the demolition schedule. If the station survived, its future would be impossible to predict. "Here," I said. "Bellwether Station, October 31st, 2026. Noon. 16 years. Can you wait that long? I already know you're worth waiting for." The line disconnected before I could answer. Over the following days, we prepared for the fire. Julian anonymously reported the electrical panel to the railway company and fire department. Inspectors visited but found no active short. The faulty wire was buried behind a wall and only failed under heavy rain. He moved a fire extinguisher near the baggage office. He loosened the bolts covering the service tunnel entrance. He copied the emergency key while Mr. Avery was at lunch and returned the original before anyone noticed. Each change altered my record slightly. The fire report gained a sentence about an anonymous electrical warning. A photograph showed an extinguisher where none had been before, but the headline remained unchanged. 3 dead, Julian Mercer among them. 5 days before Halloween, Julian asked me what I missed most about having someone in my life. The question caught me off guard. "Small things," I said. "Someone remembering how I take my coffee, hearing a key in the door and knowing who it is. Being able to tell a story without explaining all the people in it. I would remember your coffee. You don't know how I take it. Then tell me. Too much milk, no sugar. Terrible. You see, we could never be together. I take mine black. We would save money by never confusing the cups." I laughed. Then he said, "I wish we had one ordinary day." "What would we do? Miss a train on purpose?" "Why, so we could spend an hour somewhere without needing to leave. That sounds inefficient. You would complain for 10 minutes and enjoy the other 50. He understood me too well for someone I had never seen. On the night before the fire, no rain fell. We had no final call. Halloween arrived cold and gray. I spent the entire day inside Bellwether Station. In 2026, the building was empty and awaiting demolition. In 2010, according to old schedules, the last train would arrive at 10:54. Lily's father would be delayed outside the city. The electrical panel would fail sometime after 11. At 10:58, rain began. I placed the wartime blueprint beside the phone. I had marked the safest route in red. I brought flashlights, though they could help only me, and a portable battery in case the station lost power. At 11:06, the lights above me flickered. My year was reacting to his. At 11:11, the newspaper article on my desk blurred. For a few seconds, the words disappeared, then returned unchanged. At 11:17, the phone rang. I answered. Sirens screamed through the receiver. "Julian," he coughed. "It started early. Where are you?" "Waiting room. Everyone's moving toward the north exit. Find Lily now." I can hear her. A child was screaming somewhere behind him. "The baggage corridor is east of the ticket windows," I said. "Do not use the main hallway. The ceiling collapses there." "I have the key." The sound of running footsteps struck the line. In my waiting room, dust fell from the ceiling even though the building had been silent moments earlier. A black stain spread across the wall above the east hallway, appearing like ink through paper. The past was rewriting the room around me. "I'm at the door," Julian said. Metal rattled. "The key won't turn. Push the door inward while turning left. It opens outward." I checked the renovation plan. The door direction had changed in 2012. "Then pull it toward you. Lift the handle first." He grunted. The lock snapped. "Lily," he shouted. The child answered through tears. "I have her," Julian said. A crash thundered through the receiver. The article on my desk changed. The names vanished, then returned. Julian's photograph flickered between 2 different images. "The main exit is gone," he said. "Use the tunnel. Move the shelving unit on the south wall. The whole wall is shelves. 3rd section from the left. There should be scratches on the floor." I heard him dragging something heavy. Lily was coughing. The clock showed 11:25. "Found it," he said. "There's a wooden panel. Kick the lower right corner." He kicked once, twice, then a 3rd time. Wood splintered. "There's a tunnel. Take the flashlight from your camera bag. The tunnel turns north after 20 feet. They entered. In my time, the station lights went out. Only my flashlight and the green glow of the exit signs remained. Smoke drifted from the eastern hallway, impossible smoke from a fire extinguished 16 years ago. I could feel heat against my face. "Sophie," Julian said, "the passage is blocked." I studied the blueprint. A wartime storage door crossed the tunnel halfway to platform 4. "Is it brick or metal?" "Metal. There should be a wheel in the center." "It won't move. Turn counterclockwise." "I am." Lily began crying that she could not breathe. The clock showed 11:28. "Julian, use the transit token." "What?" "The token you hid for me. It has a square edge. Wedge it beneath the wheel locking pin. Then you'll never find it. We do not need the token. We need you alive." Metal scraped through the receiver. "The pin moved," he said. The wheel turned with a deep groan. They continued through the tunnel. At 11:30, the connection began breaking apart. "There's another door," Julian said. "No handle. It's the panel beside platform 4. You loosen the bolts." "3 of them." "The 4th is stuck. Step back and kick beside the bottom hinge." He kicked. The panel moved but did not open. Again, static swallowed his answer. "Julian," a violent crash shook the station. Glass broke somewhere in my dark waiting room, then his voice returned. "Lily is through. And you?" The ceiling came down between us. "Use the panel." "I can't reach it." The clock showed 11:32. "There's an access ladder," I said, searching the blueprint. 10 feet behind you. "It leads to a ventilation hatch." "I don't see it." "Run your hand along the west wall." He coughed until he could not speak. "Julian, listen to me. Find the ladder." "I found something." "Climb." The second hand approached 11:33. "Sophie, keep moving. If I make it, you will. Wait for me." The line went dead. "Julian?" The clock clicked to 11:33. "Julian?" Silence. I held the receiver and watched the article on my desk. The paper trembled as if caught in wind. The headline faded. The photograph changed first. Instead of firefighters carrying covered stretchers, it showed a young man lying on the platform with an oxygen mask over his face. A child wrapped in a blanket held his hand. New words appeared. Photographer SAVES child in BLLWATHER station fire. All passengers and staff had survived. Julian Mercer was hospitalized with smoke inhalation and a broken shoulder. 8-year-old Lily Moore was released the following morning. I laughed and cried at the same time. Then the room changed. The black burn stain vanished. Broken windows became whole. The demolition notices disappeared from my table. Boxes of records rearranged themselves into glass display cabinets. Electric lights glowed along the restored copper ceiling. Bellwether Station was no longer abandoned. A banner stretched across the waiting room. BLLWATHER Railway Museum, Grand Reopening, October 31, 2026. My employee badge changed in my pocket. It no longer identified me as a temporary archivist. It read, Sophie BNNETT, Curator. Memories entered my mind in fragments. In this version of my life, the station had received protected historical status after the fire and Lily's rescue drew national attention. I had worked at its museum for 3 years. The building had never been scheduled for demolition, but I still remembered the other timeline. I remembered the empty station, the cardboard boxes, and the promise to meet Julian. I searched the restored archives for his name. The records showed he left Bellwether after recovering from the fire. He continued working as a photographer, published 2 books, and spent years traveling. There was no marriage announcement and no current address. The payphone remained beside the ticket windows, polished and connected to nothing. It did not ring again. I checked every rainy night for the next 2 weeks. At 11:17, I stood beside it and waited. Nothing. Part of me wondered whether changing the past had erased our calls from Julian's memory. Perhaps he remembered only a fire, a tunnel, and instructions that seemed to come from nowhere. Perhaps 16 years had softened my voice until it became a dream. Then I removed the cracked blue tile. The transit token was gone. He had used it to open the tunnel door. In its place was a narrow metal box. Inside were 16 envelopes, each marked with a year. The first was dated November 2010. Sophie, I survived. Lily survived. You were right about the tunnel, the ceiling, and even the stubborn 4th bolt. I don't know whether this letter will reach the version of you who saved us. I don't know whether you still exist in the same life, but I promised to leave something, so this is the first thing. I opened the next envelope. 2011. I returned to the station tonight. The phone did not ring. Mr. Avery says he sometimes remembers a woman asking questions about old blueprints, although he insists it never happened. Maybe the station remembers you even if the world does not. 2012. I photographed a gallery in Boston today and spent the entire afternoon wondering which paintings you would have criticized. I still take my coffee black. I still remember yours. Too much milk, no sugar. 2013. I nearly married someone. She was kind, but when she asked what I was waiting for, I could not lie. I told her there was a woman I had never met who existed somewhere ahead of me. She said that sounded less like love and more like grief. Maybe it is both. Year after year, Julian wrote. He described countries he visited, photographs he took, and ordinary days he wished he could share with me. Some letters were hopeful. Others were angry. In 2017, he wrote that waiting for a date 16 years away felt like building a home on a road. In 2020, during months of isolation, he admitted he sometimes spoke to disconnected phones just to hear himself say my name. The final envelope was dated October 2026. Sophie, I don't know where you are, but I know when you are. If your promise survived whatever we changed, come to Bellwether Station at noon on October 31st. I will be beside the phone. If you don't come, I will finally accept that saving me created a world in which we never spoke. I will still be grateful. You gave Lily a life. You gave me 16 more years. That is more than anyone has the right to ask from a voice in the rain. But if you do remember, I have spent half my life waiting to hear you without static between us. Julian. October 31st was 3 days away. The museum reopening filled the station with reporters, local officials, former railway workers, and families. A grown woman named Lily Moore was scheduled to speak about the rescue that had inspired the preservation campaign. In the altered timeline, I had helped organize the event. My calendar contained months of meetings I remembered only in fragments. At 11:55, I stood beside the payphone. I had imagined Julian's face so many times that every man entering the station made my heart race. I looked for the 30-year-old silhouette I had seen in the window, then reminded myself 16 years had passed for him. At noon, the station clock began to strike. No one came. At 12:03, Lily took the stage near Platform 1. She spoke about waking in the smoke and hearing a stranger promise he would not leave her. At 12:07, I accepted that Julian had changed his mind. At 12:09, a man carrying an old camera entered through the north doors. He was tall, with dark hair touched by gray at the temples. A pale scar crossed one side of his neck. His left shoulder sat slightly lower than his right, the lasting result of the fire. He stopped when he saw me. I had never seen his face, but I knew his voice before he spoke. You sound exactly the way I remember. For 16 years, he had imagined me at 31. For several weeks, I had known him at 30. The people standing before each other were strangers shaped by the same impossible memory. You're late, I said, his eyes filled with tears. I missed a train. I laughed because once he had told me he wanted to miss one on purpose so we could have an hour without needing to leave. Was it worth it? I asked. Ask me in 50 minutes. We did not kiss beside the phone. That would have belonged to a simpler story. Instead, we walked to the station cafe and ordered coffee. Mine had too much milk and no sugar. His was black. We talked for 3 hours. Julian told me about the fire, his recovery, and the years of uncertainty. I told him about the timeline in which the station had been abandoned and about the life I remembered losing when the past changed. Do you regret it? He asked. Saving you? Changing everything. I looked around the restored waiting room. Children gathered around an old locomotive display. Lily stood laughing with Mr. Avery. Sunlight passed through windows that had been broken in my memories. No, I said, but I'm still learning which life is mine. We don't have to pretend 16 years didn't happen, and we don't have to pretend a few phone calls make us know everything about each other. Then what do? We begin again. In the same year? That would help. Julian smiled. Before leaving, he took an envelope from his camera bag. Inside was a photograph developed in 2010. It showed the third bench in Bellwether Station on the night we listened to music together. Julian sat at one end, looking toward the empty space beside him. I set the camera on a timer, he said. I wanted a picture of the place where you said you were sitting. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I examined the reflection in the ticket window. A woman sat beside Julian. She had shoulder-length brown hair and wore the same gray sweater I had worn during our first call in 2026. It was me. On the back of the photograph, Julian had written, "Some people meet before time is ready for them." That evening, we left the museum together. Rain had begun tapping softly against the copper roof. As we reached the doors, the old payphone rang. Everyone else continued walking. No one turned toward it. Julian and I stopped. The phone rang a second time. "Are you going to answer?" he asked. I thought of the ticket clerk who heard her dead husband, the boy warned by his own voice, and the two people who had fallen in love during 16 stolen minutes at a time. Then I looked at Julian standing beside me, not behind me, not ahead of me, but here. "No," I said. We walked out into the rain. I used to believe timing was the reason some people never found each other. I thought love depended on arriving at the right place before disappointment taught you to stop waiting. Julian taught me something different. Sometimes time is not a wall. Sometimes it is simply the long road love takes to bring two people to the same place.